Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Navigating Traceability and Tariffs, Preparing Your Seafood Business for FSMA 204 and the Current Geopolitical Landscape. Brought to you by Seafood Source and sponsored by CAI Software. Before we officially get started, I do have a few housekeeping notes to go over. If you have any technical issues using the webinar platform, please use the Q&A box and I will respond right away. Do note that refreshing your browser often solves most tech issues on this webinar platform. But again, you can use that Q&A box if you still have any issues. Note there is no call-in number for today's session. To connect, you just need to have access to either a computer, tablet, or cell phone for audio, and everyone's lines have been muted. For your convenience, everything in the webinar console is fully customizable, so you can move things around, resize the windows, and even turn on captions for this event in the media player. And at the bottom of your console, you'll find the resources box. This is where you can download the slides from today's webinar as a PDF. There's also a speaker's bio section where you can read about our speakers today. There's also a Q&A box. Those are for any tech-related issues as well as any content-related questions. And we'll do our best to leave time at the end to run a Q&A with our speakers. If we're not able to get to all questions today, I'll make sure to forward those off to our sponsor for follow-up via email. And finally, this webinar is being recorded, and you'll receive a thank you email with the on-demand materials within 2 business days. This will include a link to the webinar console again, so you can log in, replay the webinar, download the slides if needed. So look for that in your inbox within the next 2 business days. And with that out of the way, I would like to hand off the webinar to our speakers today. We've got Kyra Humber, who is the seafood expert at CAI Maritech. And we also have Judith Kirkness, who's the VP of CAI Monitor Software Solutions and Traceability Expert. And at this time, I'd like to welcome Kyra and Judith to begin their presentation.
Thank you very much. So first and foremost, good afternoon and welcome. I want to thank you all for being here today. We appreciate you taking the time to participate in our webinar this afternoon. We understand that you are all quite busy, but we hope that within our time together, we can answer some of the very prominent and impending questions that surround our industry today. So welcome to Navigating Traceability and Tariffs. I'll just give the mic over to Judith to introduce herself before I take back over again.
Thanks, Kyra. It looks like they've got me down as a pioneer, which I think is just a very nice way of saying I've been doing this for a very long time. I've been here I've been over 35 years working with processors to automate inventory control, traceability, and I actually love educating and writing. And so I've got a couple of books on traceability. The most recent is called Traceability for Food Manufacturers, How to Be Ready for Blockchain. So if anybody wants a copy of that, they can email the info email at the end, and we'd be happy to send them a PDF. So back to you.
Awesome. So as previously mentioned, my name is Kyra Humber. I primarily work on the implementation and integration side of seafood-specific ERP systems. I've worked with large-scale global companies, small local seafood traders, and really anything in between. I've been with Maritech for 3 years today, actually, and have really enjoyed understanding the seafood industry and then also working with people just like those of you on our call today. Our colleagues here at CAI are scattered worldwide. Our predominant markets are within North America and Europe, and most recently into the Asian markets. We are highly focused on seafood processes, as well as becoming trusted advisors for helping businesses achieve their full potential. So today, together, both Judith and I really hope to be able to answer some of these really important questions that surround our industry. We hope you take this information and think of in terms of how you can better optimize your seafood processes in this changing world. So What exactly is it that we're going to be diving into today? How are we going to answer these questions for you? Well, our main question, and one that we're going to keep coming back to for the duration of this webinar, is why automate? What sorts of drivers cause these changes, and how can you be one step ahead? I remember once when I was quite little hearing a quote that read, "The only constant is change." As a young kid, I really remember thinking to myself, that's silly. And I kind of just moved on from it. But what's interesting about that quote is that it has stuck with me for whatever reason or another. And not only that, it has become more and more evident in our world today. We can all see it, we can all feel it, and we are currently all experiencing it. From a business standpoint, embracing this change is no longer just a strategy, but in reality, it's actually a necessity. So how can we stay on top of this? Well, businesses must remain agile and adaptive. Those who are able to actually anticipate trends, innovate their practices, and stay attuned to the needs of their customers will not only survive these changes, but flourish in the process. So how are we going to do this? Well, first, we need to understand what exactly triggers this need for change. If we can understand them, then we can adapt to them. FSMA 204, the Food Safety and Modernization Act, introduces critical FDA regulations aimed at improving the safety of seafood products. This includes things like electronic tracking of items, detailed traceability reports, increased accountability and response to food safety incidences. And what does that mean for you? Well, it likely means you're going to have more auditors coming into your facilities. This usually means both time and resources being distracted or essentially wasted from generating revenue for your business. Perhaps your manager needs more insightful data in order to make more informed decisions. Maybe you're growing and Excel just will not cut it anymore. Or maybe you have too many solutions that feel just very disconnected. If you could solve these problems, maybe it's one, maybe it's an accumulation of the few of these, whatever it might be, why wouldn't you? And since we've already discovered that the only constant is change, our goal today is to show you how you can not only survive this, but thrive while preparing for the future.
So let's start with just a quick understanding of FSMA, and that stands for Food Safety Modernization Act. And it's really a set of rules that the FDA put in place to get better traceability, get better insight for food safety, and if there's a recall need, be able to get at that information quickly to try and reduce any kind of bad outcomes, people getting sick, that sort of thing. So that was their main goal in creating these, and they went about it. They started in 2011, and they went about it by first coming out with some initial rules, then going to industry organizations and stakeholders and basically saying, what do you think? And after all that feedback came in, they would adjust these rules until they finally came out with their final rule on traceability. And they actually had a deadline of January 2026, but that's actually been pushed out to July 2028. Now, note that that deadline is actually for US-based companies, and this is an FDA program. If you are supplying the US from outside the US, your deadline is actually already passed. You are supposed to be compliant to this, and it's actually the food importer in the US who is taking responsibility for saying that their foreign suppliers meet these food safety standards and rules and regulations, and that they're producing safe food and not adulterated or misbranded. All of that comes down to the importer of that product. And since the USDA in 2024 came out with its, they reported that over 79% of the fish products consumed in the US actually came from outside the US. This involves a lot of global players. And so whether your deadline is passed and you need to get on it, or whether your deadline is still in front of you, we hope today to kind of give you some ideas on how you could meet those requirements and get a lot more from it than just a check mark that you're following the rules. Now, who does this apply to? Don't feel that they've picked on seafood processors in particular. There's actually something they call the food traceability list. And this is what they have considered to be, the government, the highest risk foods for illness in the US. And so they've identified these. And if your product is on the food traceability list, then you are going to have to comply at some point. And so that's, you know, as I say, there's cheeses, there's milk, there's lots of things, not just seafood. But if you see any of your kind of products on here, then you know that your deadline is coming if you're in the US, or your deadline is over if you're supplying from outside. So our goal is to help you become more than just compliant. I mean, if you see this, if you view this as just a cost line item in your business, and you're just saying, okay, well, I'm just going to pass it off to the QC folks. This is a QC issue. Well, then you're missing out on some real opportunities to take the fact that you have to comply with this anyway and say, well, what else can I as a business get out of this that make it really worth my while to invest in this kind of technology and the time and resources to implement it. So that's a little bit what we're going to talk about and go into those benefits later on.
So we all understand that the seafood supply chain is quite unique and complex. It can involve multiple points of communication and change of command. Optimizing this chain is crucial for ensuring freshness, minimizing waste, and enhancing sustainability. What are some of the areas that we can optimize? Well, in enhancing transparency. Right from the purchasing stage, you want to be able to trust your numbers. Using things like forecasting or predictions to make the accurate and informed decisions on which inventory to buy is crucial. Things like changing seasons can affect the inventory, so being able to analyze these seasonal trends and to know what to buy at the right times is also paramount. You can improve your purchase order management by thinking in terms of, do we have the right inventory? Efficiency strategies. So centralized information. An ERP system consolidates this data from various departments, whether it's finance, inventory, sales, into one single platform, which can reduce the data silos and improve access to information. A lot of modern day solutions allow for integrations with things like scale, so hardwares and softwares. And then these systems can actually communicate quite flawlessly so that you as the user locate it all in one spot. You can get real-time updates. So real-time data available, teams can make informed decisions quickly, enhancing responsiveness to market changes, as well as operational challenges. Better management and accountability. So creating claims and credits easily, processing claims, credit claims, and returns from a customer in a managed approval process with details, pictures, attachments, notes, all easily accessible so that all users can see this information. I once had a customer actually who was very frustrated with one of their own customers. My customer created recurring orders for 3 of their customers. They all received the same product. However, one of those 3 customers was continuously creating claims. It was never very much, maybe a unit here, 2 units there, whatever it might have been. But he thought to himself, like, how could this be? The inventory is all being harvested, all being processed, and all being packaged in the same way. Well, after some investigation, he was actually able to pinpoint the problem. And although that they were being processed and packaged the same way, they were actually leaving with different transporters. So what he realized was that something was happening to the inventory in that transportation process. What he was able to do with that quick insight was correct the problem very easily in a matter of minutes. He was able to communicate with his transporters to change that problem. And then not only that, he was actually able to take accountability for the issue, and he acted appropriately. He solved his own frustrations, and he mended the relationship with that customer. The customer was understood the problem and then was no longer getting frustrated with it. So having a software solution that allows you to track these claims, compare claims, whatever it might be, you can actually save yourself copious amounts of time and money for the future. So combined, these are all different ways that we can optimize our supply chain in a way that's both beneficial for you as the ones who adapt to these softwares and your customers as well. What can you expect with the implementation of an ERP system, more specifically a seafood ERP system? Let's look at some of the facts. So inventory management. Companies that implement inventory management softwares report an average reduction in inventory costs by 20 to 30%. This includes improved tracking, which reduces the waste and the spoilage. Production efficiency. Research shows that manufacturers using production scheduling softwares can increase efficiency by up to 30%. This helps processors optimize their workflows, reduce downtime, and meet their demands more effectively. Quality control. Implementing quality management systems can lead to a 25% reduction in defects. So for seafood processors, this means improved quality and reduced returns on reprocessing costs. Traceability and compliance. Companies utilizing traceability softwares can respond to recalls up to 80% faster. In our industry, this speed is critical, where freshness and safety are paramount. Data-driven decision-making. Organizations that leverage data and analytics report improved decision-making speeds by 5 to 10 times. So again, for seafood processors, this means quicker adjustments to production schedules based on the market demand or the supply chain disruptions. Cost savings. Companies that implement enterprise resource planning systems can see a return on investment up to 300% in 3 years. This is because they streamline operations and reduce administrative costs. But don't take our word for it. Let's hear from a customer. So Matorka, a sustainable land-based fish farm that emphasizes working in harmony with the natural ecosystem that surrounds them. They are located in Grindavik, Iceland, and they use 100% green geothermal electricity with pristine lava-filtered waters to harvest their Arctic char. Raising their fish from eggs in their hatchery and processing pinbone out fillets for the US and European markets, they have found tremendous advantages in adopting a cloud-based ERP solution. They were initially looking for a solution that integrated both their hardwares and their softwares together, increasing their efficiency on the processing lines and invoicing stages. In the process of solving these issues, they were actually able to combat the upcoming traceability requirements well before they become mandated. Lund's. So Lund's Fishery, a New Jersey-based seafood company, is renowned for its high-quality products and its position as the sole U.S. seafood company harvesting 3 domestic squid species. They were first looking for a solution to overcome the challenges of efficiently managing their vast amounts of data inherent within their operations. Since transitioning, Lund's has been able to have their information readily available whenever and wherever they are. Because of this, they have actually been able to gain quick insight into both historical and real-time data, which has led them to quicker decision-making. They have also adopted new processes since implementing data tools. New operational advantage processes, for example, now they look at inventory levels retroactively, which has allowed them to predict their analytics efficiently. Streamlining data and viewing analysis does become more and more critical as their volume grows. So once their groundwork was laid, reporting became a perpetual asset. This approach ensured analytic efforts are not just a one-time investment, but an ongoing source for valuable insight for the company.
Now, before I talk about Excel, I just wanted to go over what are the big picture requirements of the FSMA traceability that you're responsible for. I mean, in a big picture, you're responsible for what we like to call one up, one down traceability. And that means that for all of the inputs that you either buy in or you process or harvest yourself, you've got to assign lot numbers, and often it's a good idea to use the supplier's lot numbers. So you've got lot numbers on your incoming ingredients. Then you might package or do some sort of processing, and you have to track the quantities and which lot numbers you used in making those products. That's the one down traceabilities. You're tracking from your supplier into your own inventory system. Then you're tracking from your inventory system into any new products that you make and assigning those lot numbers. And then finally, the one up side of traceability is that you track which of the lot numbers that you've made go to which customers, and that you have a method electronically to be able to pull that information together very quickly. So if there's a food safety incident, you've got some way of going back and saying, okay, well, when did I make that product? What did I make it from? So that you could put some of those items on hold, you could do your own investigations, and more importantly, you can contribute to any kind of food safety investigations that are ongoing to make sure that that any unsafe food is pulled from the market appropriately. Now, to accomplish that, I mean, most of my customers started out and they came to me using clipboards and paper, and often they would use Excel. And I love Excel, don't get me wrong. I'm a huge pivot table person, and I just love Excel. And I found this particular stat to be super interesting. I know I have found a lot of, well, not a lot, but I found errors in my own formulas on Excel sheets, especially when you're adding rows or columns. And those errors can be very critical in the numbers and information that you're tracking. And one of the things about Excel is that it's basically an open field. Because our lot numbers can be alphanumeric in this world, in Excel, you pretty much have to set that up as a text field, which means it's an open field. And one of the things about that is let's think about how it can cause any sort of Excel-based inventory system to get completely out of whack very, very quickly. So let's say you've got something that arrives and the person at receiving sees a lot number and says, oh, that's lot 001. And they record that as lot 001 in their Excel spreadsheet. Then someone later on says, okay, I'm going to do a process, I'm going to package, or I'm going to make something from this. So I'm pulling a certain quantity. Maybe I received 1,000 pounds of lot 001. And now they look and they say, okay, I'm pulling, half of this, 500 pounds. What am I doing? I look on it and I say, okay, lot 001. So I record, I've used lot 001. Now, if it's an open field, which it often has to be, it means that your one side of your spreadsheet says that I received 1,000 pounds of lot 001. Another spreadsheet or tab in your spreadsheet could say, I used 500 pounds of lot 001. And realistically, you never had lot 001 in stock. It's just someone looking, and that's what they interpret that lot number to be. And if there's open fields like that, there's no actual verification to say, wait a minute, that's not even possible because you didn't have any of lot 001 in stock. You only had lot 001. And that's really where computer systems come in and can help you with those, reducing of errors or catching things right as they're happening, especially if you're using barcodes. But even if you're not, it's just a matter of making sure that did I have enough of that lot of that product in stock at that time to make the transaction valid? And if you did, great, it's a valid transaction. If you didn't, then obviously we've got to stop for a second and say, whoa, that's not possible. So what is actually happening? And so that's really where, computer-based systems that are verifying lot numbers throughout the process can be a better option than trying to do it all with Excel.
So, as we've established at the very beginning of our time together, embracing change is no longer just a strategy, but in fact, it is a necessity. We know that changes can be daunting. So if we alter our mind frame just a little bit to think of all the opportunities that we could actually gain from this, it might become slightly less terrifying. So for example, compliance as an opportunity. These can include things like enhancing trust and credibility surrounding your brand, streamlining operations, access to new markets, confident risk management tools, and sustainability leadership. No matter what it is that you are trying to achieve within your business, a specifically designed ERP system is going to help you get there. Chances are the benefits that you see will be far beyond what you initially expected. And you will gain relationships with trusted partners and advisors to the seafood industry. Service expansion. So investing in a scalable and adaptable system before it's too late can also help in the long term. In a software that automates compliance tracking and reporting makes it easier to manage our obligations. So why not leverage this technology further? The possibilities in technology are always expanding. Having a software that creates the room for continuous improvement will set you far beyond others. You can use these for promotional strategies. So by highlighting your commitment to compliance, you actually start to showcase yourself as a key differentiator. The compliance regulations will put you ahead of your competitors and result in a market advantage. Margin improvement. Maybe your interests lay within the company margins. Maybe today you have an employee who is responsible for calculating all the costs, yields, margins. Now, imagine if a system did this automatically for you. What would that mean for you? Well, it's going to reduce your labor costs. It's going to increase efficiency and allow you to make more informed decisions that benefit your operation. By using an automated software, the value that you add to your business is incomparable. And it's all because you, as someone in the seafood industry, needed to comply with inevitable changes. I'll hand it off to Judith now, who's going to continue with a real-world example.
So when we talk about barcodes and the world of barcodes, the GS1 organization, which is a global organization, I think there's 118 countries that are part of it. And it's a nonprofit organization designed to help ensure that barcodes throughout the world, there aren't duplicates. So when you start to use a system, you want to make sure, of course, that you don't scan a barcode and then later on another of your suppliers uses the exact same barcode. So that's kind of their mandate. And they have a number of different barcodes that they use. But in the seafood industry, as is in the meat and pretty much in the cheese industry, the standard barcode in use throughout the world is called the Code 128 or GS1 128 barcode. And really what's unique about this kind of barcode is that it contains multiple pieces of information that can be captured in a single scan. So in this particular form, there's 2D forms, which is kind of the square barcodes, and then there's this sort of picket fence linear forms, and both of them can contain a Code 128 or GS1 128 format. Now, the particular segments that are included in a given barcode depend on the company that's printed the barcode. Now, the segments that are most common in the seafood industry are going to be the O1 segment or O2, which is basically the product identifier. And embedded in that section is a supplier prefix. So that helps link that back to what supplier is it and what product is it. Now, then there are other segments, such as 13 or one of the other date segments. There are multiple date segments. There's actually 99 segments that could be in one of these barcodes. And not every country or every company will use all of the barcodes or segments, of course. They will pick and choose based on the products that they make. So in seafood, there is going to be typically a 21 segment, which is a serial number. So you can see that often in the human readable information below a barcode, there are little brackets. They don't have to be the brackets because this is just a human readable version to make it easier for you to decode that barcode. So when you're looking at barcodes, I get a lot of customers where they say, oh, I've got barcodes and everything. I'm totally ready for scanning. And when we go and we take a look at the barcodes that are in their warehouse, what we find is that some of the barcodes are really only identifying what item it is. If you're really only getting something that has, an embedded supplier prefix and an item code, well, that's great. It tells you what product that is, but that will not help you with traceability. For traceability, we really need the lot information or serial number information encoded into a barcode. And that's why these particular barcodes are so awesome, is because computer programs can take those barcodes and decode the different segments and plop them into fields within the database. And that makes more accessible. I know I've seen situations where a recall has come from like a very large company, and rather than put out a series of serial numbers, which generally there are serial numbers used when there are unique weights to each case. And so rather than issuing, thousands of serial numbers that they're recalling, they'll just say, okay, I'm going to recall all the product with the production date of X. And that was embedded somewhere in the barcode. And so if you're using a manual traceability system, you wouldn't necessarily have written down all the information in that from that barcode if you weren't scanning it. And so that's where you start to realize that it could open you up to a much wider recall if you can't access the information that might be encoded into these barcodes, and you further sent those on to customers. The wider your recall, the more expensive it is for you. And sometimes, it can even bankrupt companies. So, one of the key things is making sure that if there's a lot of information, and there are other codes that could be in these barcodes, you could have a country of origin code, which is getting more and more popular. And so if you've got a program that can take those pieces from the single scan and help you to move that piece throughout your manufacturing process. So you receive that in, and now you've taken that and used that as an input to some process, or you're using these barcodes on your own products on the outgoing side, then that can allow you to track all the different pieces of information should there be a recall, or to reduce any recall from supplier products that you're receiving. Now, Kyra talked about accurate costs and yields being a consequence of traceability. And the way that works is that, if you're having to track, which you are for traceability purposes, all of the lots that you put in, you receive. Well, if you can combine that information, not just the lots and quantities, but the costs that went into purchasing those, whether it's a combination of the actual cost you pay your supplier, maybe there's fuel surcharges, or as we're going to talk about very shortly, maybe there's tariffs, you're getting a landed cost for that particular product. When you're now using that in production, and all of those different landed costs from all the inputs that are going into production are combined, and you make a certain number of the finished goods, well, a computer is really good at just adding up all those input costs and then distributing across however many outputs that you made. And so that's something where, when costs are so dynamically changing, it helps you keep an eye on your costs, and therefore, are you selling it for the appropriate amount of money to make the margin that you need to make as a business? Now, let's talk a little bit about tariffs because obviously it's a very hot topic. As I mentioned earlier, there's an estimated of 79% of the U.S. Seafood that is coming from outside the U.S. So this is a very real issue that's affecting, I'm sure, all of you, and probably one of the reasons that you're here today. That puts a lot of pressure on prices, and it can put pressure on prices in an unequal way. So for instance, if you're importing, a product from one particular place and that now has a tariff on it, whereas your competitor down the road is importing something similar from a completely different country who is not facing that tariff, of course, you now have unequal costs. And that can really, really mess with your business and your planning because knowing your costs obviously affects what can you sell it for. But more importantly, if your prices are changing, obviously what happens is your customers start saying, well, am I going to substitute a less expensive product? Am I going to be able to sell as much of that now that the price has gone up? So it makes it really hard for you as a company to predict what do you need to make, what do you need to buy if the costs are constantly changing, and if the market is therefore changing some of their preferences on what they buy based on those changing costs. So this instability in the pricing can definitely affect your own sales. And that's one reason why when costs are changing so fast, it's kind of hard if you've, for instance, got cost spreadsheets that you're using, and you're not getting this dynamic effect of the cost calculating based on every single receiving that you do and recalculating. And so that's like a real tangible business benefit that you can get from using a software program that's got that kind of verification.
So first and foremost, we are not necessarily accountants, so we're not trying to give accounting advice. However, it is really important for us to be able to look at an example of how these tariffs can affect the seafood industry and people like you on our call today. So discussions about tariffs have been at the forefront of U.S. import and export markets for quite some time now. And a part of these tariffs really do encompass our seafood industry. So if we focus in on the Alaskan seafood industry, we can get a really good look at how these tariffs might affect us. So back and forth discussion regarding tariffs could especially impact the Alaskan seafood prices. This is due of the heavy reliance that Alaskan seafood has on Chinese labor. Tariffs have been a moving target. So a huge part of the seafood is sent over to be processed in China and then are re-exported back into the US. It's a fairly common practice for products like pollock and salmon specifically. Over half of Alaska's fish is sent over to China. This is usually where the pin bones are removed and then re-imported as packaged goods for retail in the US. As Alaska moves into the fishing season, these dual tariffs, both from the US and China, are going to increase the cost of that processing. This will then be passed along to consumers and could soften the demand for things like Alaskan salmon. With China as Alaska's largest seafood export market, there could be a huge surplus of seafood that remains within the US market, and especially during the salmon harvesting season. This could potentially depress wholesale prices that are paid to Alaska fishermen and processors, at least in the short term. One of the outcomes might be that processors in Alaska turn to domestic processing. This will have a higher labor cost associated to it and will trickle down into the consumer. As for Chinese consumers, they may also turn to competitors like Russia or Norway, which previously did happen back in 2018 during the trade war. Russian pollock imports to the US surged as a result of these tariffs on the US. This led to a 20% drop in seafood sales in China, impacting 65% of Alaskan seafood businesses. As labor markets and supply chains adjust, Alaska's fishing company and US consumers will likely feel this pinch, at least in the short term. Tariffs do create a ripple effect that can influence everything from seafood prices to international market access and the viability of export routes to the economic stability of the fishing communities. So while some producers may be able to adjust and find new markets, the broader impact on prices, job security, and long-term industry growth could be a major concern.
Okay, so basically, our goal when we work with clients is to help them reduce the silos of information. When I start with a customer, I might find them using like 10 different systems, for example, and that's not even the lowest number that I've seen. And what we see is that as a business grows, they often start adding programs for specific purposes within their business. And they kind of get to a point where in their growth, they're saying, wait a minute, there's not enough information talking between those two programs to allow me to get very immediate reports, consolidated reports, that sort of thing. So solutions that can unify and bring together and reduce the number of siloed systems can really help you with your decision making and getting that information together quick. As I said, it can help with catching errors, especially if those are live programs and they're integrated in a live way, so that right when someone scans something, for instance, if it didn't exist in the database, that's known to them right at that time. There isn't something like later on it's syncing up sort of thing. And then having verification of transactions can really help reduce errors. As Kyra says, you want to be able to trust your numbers. You want to be able to look in a system and say, hey, if it says I have 1,000 pounds of this product, that I don't have to walk back in the back to make sure I can trust that that information is accurate. And that's really sort of one of the goals, is to reduce those silos of information.
And as we have discussed throughout this webinar, major problems are solved by implementing seafood software systems. Seafood specific systems can be like crucial for the improved success of seafood companies. We can see here on the screen that things like inventory, order management and customer relationships, traceability, recalls, shipping, supply chain optimization, recipes, formula management, production schedule and efficiency, cost control, and profitability are all things that can truly be solved with the implementation of a seafood specific software.
Okay, so we're not going to spend much time on us. We're going to get to questions very quickly. So we'll just take maybe 2 minutes just to tell you a little bit about CAI. So CAI has a very unique business model, and that is that it's not just one program that we're offering. They have put together and combined a number of different programs under one company, and so we can help people from very small, integrate with QuickBooks, give them that inventory control traceability, right through to very large.
And why a food-specific ERP system? We truly here at CAI respect the idea that the knowledge, especially the knowledge in the seminar today, is not strictly on the screen with Judith and I and us speaking to you. Instead, it lays within the everyday trials and tribulations that we hear from people like you. So we focus our efforts on understanding and learning from them, the needs and the changes from you, potential users, and the perspectives that you guys hold. These all give us valuable insight as to how we can better accommodate for all members of the seafood value chain. Throughout our journey, these are just some of the conclusions that we have reached as to why it is important to invest in a seafood-specific ERP system and the benefits that you could see. And these are things that we have been told from customers and our potential customers. We do understand, obviously, that the seafood industry is really quite unique, Seafood businesses, whether they're involved in fishing, farming, processing, distribution, or retail, everyone faces a very distinct set of challenges. These challenges are driven by factors such as perishable products, complex supply chain demands, and highly regulated environments. So if you could get ahead of these challenges while gaining a tremendous amount of benefits, why wouldn't you want to do that? In this changing world, if you can adapt, all while improving your own organization and efficiency, well, the benefits truly are incomparable.
Now, I realize we didn't really define, Kyra, ERP. It stands for Enterprise Resource Planning. There are so many acronyms in our industry. It's basically describing combining your operational side of your business, whether that's your weighing and labeling, as well as your inventory control, traceability, that sort of thing, with the side of the business, such as who are you selling it to, and even accounting in some cases. So we have our 3 programs that we offer that are very specific to the seafood industry. Our Food Connects for the very smaller companies who want to integrate with QuickBooks. Then we've got Meritech, and both of those are cloud-based solutions. Meritech goes up to giant multinational companies, as well as much smaller companies. Again, is a cloud-based offering. But it integrates with more than just QuickBooks. It integrates with, Dynamics 365 and other larger ERP systems. And then we have CSoft, which is kind of a all-in-one solution, which gives you both the inventory control and the accounting all in one place. So that's enough about us. I'd say, certainly, if there's things that we can share from our knowledge, we encourage you to ask the questions. And we always learn from this sort of process ourselves. We, as Kyra says, we don't believe that all the knowledge is certainly by any means up at the front of the slides today. It's really in what people can share among themselves to help us all understand the changes coming in the industry.
Thank you, Judith and Kyra. We will now run a Q&A. Just a reminder, you can ask your questions in the Q&A box and make sure to hit submit to send them. We have a few questions here. Our first question is, what are the most significant challenges seafood businesses are facing right now in adapting to FSMA 204 traceability requirements, and where should they begin?
Yeah, I mean, I think, knowing that electronic traceability, and in some cases, depending on who you sell to, being asked to contribute to a blockchain, which a lot of the big retailers, things like Walmart, they're currently piloting various blockchains where you will have to contribute that electronic information about any products you sell to them, not about everything that you make for everybody, just about products you sell to them. But I think the reality is that as we get more of these technologies that are put in place by our customers, for example, we've got to make sure that our back-end systems ourselves are able to generate the kinds of information that they're going to be asking for, so that if Walmart comes knocking, you're able to say, yes, I'm ready to sell to you. And I think that's the same for large food service organizations. So I'd say, it's just being ready, depending on the market you plan to sell to, and keeping up, like with Seafood Source, on what's going on in those industries, and if there's blockchains coming, if there's other things that are coming, new regulations that are coming. Kyra, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail pretty good on the head there. And obviously no matter what you buy or sell in the seafood industry, there might be different requirements for that. So being up to date on what they might be for your specific business will also be a really important aspect.
Now, I see someone's asking, how does it affect live lobsters? I am not as familiar with that vertical. What do you have to say? You have some live lobster customers, don't you, Kyra?
Our software does. I have not worked firsthand with them quite yet. However, it is definitely something that we will be coming face-to-face with more and more. That is something, if you want specific, I believe it was Bill, you asked that question. if you would like some specific answers on that, that is something I can absolutely do some research on. And I can email you on that front as well, once I have some specific information for you.
Thank you both. Let's see here. We have another question. How can seafood processors practically balance the cost and complexity of traceability upgrades with their current operational and financial constraints?
I mean, that's obviously, the big question, right? Like, these systems do cost money. And they're also costing time, which is money, of course. So, it takes time to implement a system. And so that's why you really got to keep those benefits in mind as you do that, to say, okay, what's the pot of gold at the end of this rainbow that I'm looking to achieve, and what can I get as a business beyond just satisfying those government relationships? But yeah, the cost is, there are some grants out there in various different areas, depending on your vertical, that may assist with implementing technology, buying equipment, that sort of thing. But and maybe more coming, who knows, because the industry is changing so rapidly.
Mm-hmm. And we've seen, businesses as small as a one-man show invest in software. And like over, a couple of years have seen amazing return on investment in that. Sometimes it might take a little bit longer, but the bottom line is that typically speaking, you will always get your return on investment and see tremendous gains from that as well.
And I think the cloud-based offerings make it easier to implement, because you're not having to, necessarily buy or invest in a server. So you're not buying as much hardware. You're really just buying licensing and then services to help you get up and running. So I think the new models of subscription-based pricing within our industry do make it more palatable and easier to try these technologies.
Mm-hmm. They're becoming more and more scalable as well. So maybe you start with one area of, maybe it's just purchasing and selling, and then maybe you move into, things like credits and claims once you've seen the benefit of the ordering side of it. So there is the option to always scale up as well, or scale down if you realize maybe you don't need something, or and vice versa.
Thank you. We have a question here. What role does transparency play in building consumer trust, and how can companies turn regulatory compliance into a competitive advantage?
So typically speaking, transparency is always the best option, at least from what I've handled with some of my own customers. Is that when things have gone wrong, taking the accountability of things and being quite honest about what went wrong, how you're going to actually improve that, has always been the best method. And then also being transparent with regards to these traceability requirements, right? Understanding what it is exactly that will go into this and the needs that you will have to meet will just help. It will differentiate you ahead of those who who are not doing those sorts of things as well.
And I think actually consumers, I think they think that we have a lot more systems in place at many of our processors than really is the case. And I think that's one reason why the FSMA deadline may have been moved out, is because I think still industry is not quite there yet. And so I think what consumers think is possible may not really be possible in the back end. And until you're faced with, say, a recall, you may not realize how your systems are not up to it. So I think that's one reason why I think more and more people are, and even more retailers or food service distributors are saying, look, I want you to have in place, a GFSI, a Global Food Safety Initiative program, or something that can prove to me that you're monitoring regularly, following up on issues, all of that kind of thing. And when you have those in place, I think it can open up more markets for you. You've got that GFSI certification, whether it's BRC, SQF, whatever it is that you might go for. And that's going to help you to scale your own business. So I think when it comes to consumers, I don't know if they really, I think they think everybody's there, but we all know we're not quite there.
And then we have a question.
So I don't know if the legislation will require a code 128. I mean, I think a lot of people are still putting what's called a GTIN 14, which is really just the product identifier, or maybe because everything has to have a lot number on it, whether that's human readable or not. It's really about using the code 128 allows everybody in the supply chain to very quickly get at the multiple pieces of information. I've seen some labels coming from different countries where they've got the lot number and it is in a barcode, but it's separate from the item code, which, most of our systems can manage that as well. It just means that your staff are having to scan and your staff are having to pay attention to, well, what's the lot number barcode on this? And it's always going to be in a different place. The nice thing about the standards of the code 128 is that, if you see that kind of a barcode and you scan it, whatever information's in there, typically can go into its correct spot within a system. And that's what makes it such a, well, I'm kind of a barcode nut. It makes it my favorite barcode, is because it's got so much versatility to have all of these different segments, whether some of those segments might be ones you use just internally in your business or segments that the next person down the supply chain can actually take advantage of. I think we're a far way from full supply chain traceability, but I think everybody knows that would be the end goal. And the code 128 really makes it a lot easier for the next person along the path. I'd like to see it become mandatory.
Yeah, just for reference for the audience, because they can't see that question that came in. It was, will
sorry.
the legislation require the 128 code on all of the products, or the code is just a means to better traceability? So that was the question.
Sorry, I should have read that out.
No. You did great. You did great. I'll give everyone just a couple more seconds to enter any last comments or questions. One question we got was just a few people have asked about the on-demand material. So just a reminder that everyone will receive an email from Seafood Source within the next 2 business days with access to this webinar console where you can replay the webinar and download the slides if needed. And it looks like,
and if you think of questions like 5 minutes from now, which is often the case, there's our email. Just email us and we'll be happy to respond.
Well, and I was just, I just wanted to speak to Bill again. If you could please email the email on the screen, the info@CAAsoft, with that question, then I will be the one to answer that directly as well. It'll get forwarded along to me just because I realize I don't have your email address. So if you could email that, it will get forwarded to me and I will respond to your questions. And that goes for everyone else on the call as well.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank both Judith and Kyra for a great presentation today. And I want to thank all of our attendees for taking the time out of your busy day to join us. As a reminder, if you could please fill out the short evaluation form that will appear on the webinar console, your feedback would be greatly appreciated. And with that, I hope that everyone has a great rest of the day. This webinar was brought to you by Seafood Source and sponsored by CAI Software. Thank you all and talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.